All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. So, welcome back. Hope you enjoyed Jen's session last week with the Together in Transition session. For those joining us on the internet, welcome as well. Or if you're watching this at a later date, hopefully you'll get some gleaning out of it as well. So, we did the culture of wellness this week, which is in the middle of the book. Hopefully that's what you had read. I read it, and unfortunately the copy that I read from with all my notes, I took it home to read it, and I left it at home. So I don't have my notes with me, unfortunately, but I do have the book here, and I remember quite well what I was going to talk about today. But more importantly, I want to hear what's on your mind about this culture of wellness. As into the cycle of blessing. So before we delve into that, let's see if there's any thoughts from these previous chapters or anything that surfaced from any of the other stuff in the reading before we get into this chapter 6 and 7 today.
Can I say something that's not related to the class? Now that I already have. So we're trying to get greeters established again. And I really would like to see this happen in June, if that's possible. So Cindy's our coordinator for the 8:30 folks. And I know she's been contacting everybody. So if you were a greeter, thank you for doing it again. And if you would like to be a greeter, please let Cindy know. And if not, we'll call you.
You need 11 o'clock as well, Chad?
Yes, and then Saturday night, typically what we've done is Saturday night is the ushers are the greeters for Saturday night. So I talked to the 8:30 folks, and they just kind of wanted to keep it that way. So we'll see. And Higley is the contact for the 11 o'clock. And I know she's been contacting folks as well. So June, we'd like to get this started again, please.
Okay, well, yeah, things are inching their way back to the so. Yeah, the COVID steering committee, of which I'm a member, just one member of, had met, and where a lot of the congregations have already gone to mask optional, and we were one of the earlier ones with that 11 o'clock. But now we're kind of behind some of the other places. We gave people 2 weeks, I think, is what the rationale, right? To just say, hey, beginning in June, these are going to be mask optional. So technically, I know a lot of people are feeling more comfortable because I was like, wait a second, nobody here has masks.
We came in with masks.
Yeah.
And then right before you came down, we burned them back.
Well, that I think the team thought too, people know what's best for them. So if you need to distance, well, there's enough space and things like that. So, and hopefully it'll go fine and we can move on with this COVID thing. So, all right. So chapter 6 was a story about Muhammad Yunus. Have you heard of him? Anybody heard of him? He was a Nobel Peace Prize winner, economist. Kind of developed this thing with, basically a currency for impoverished people. It was in India, and it's quite a remarkable story. And then our author, Eric Law, kind of uses that as a backdrop, a biblical backdrop of the feeding of the 5,000, and how Yunus was able to do that, to offer loans to impoverished people to help get them started. Now, I will say, part of what we do with the ELCA, and there's other churches do this as well, is the God's Global Barnyard and things of that nature. For the World Hunger, we collect the funds. And in some of the partner churches in Africa, they loan small amount of money to help people, basically subsistence farming, that they grow what they eat and that's their living. But you'll be amazed at what you could do with 2 goats. And 2 goats can breed and have 4 goats. And so it's just these very micro ways to help people get a foot on. And from there, there's cattle. In fact, Pastor Luau, who I mentioned in my sermon, that was one of his things. He had 2 cows, from there you got the milk. He had tons of goats that they also had, in Tanzania particularly, that culture, goat was like what we would probably eat steak, they love goat, and of course a lot of starches like rice and things of that nature. But things like 2 cows, where they can breed, what have you, it all of a sudden becomes a profitable business in agriculture. So it only takes a little bit to get it going. So that's kind of the point of Eunice's work, and he did that on kind of a global level and was recognized for that. I think he was an economist, is what the book said. I don't know much about his background, but he was a Nobel Peace Prize winner maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little longer. Time goes so fast, 15 maybe. So, but the backdrop of this is kind of creating a culture of wellness, which he picks up on in chapter 7. And he uses this kind of way of our bodies. We have different systems within our bodies, right? We all know our systems, and there's a doctor for every system, it seems like, out there. But I think he made the point of saying the most important system is the circulatory system, right? That brings the oxygen. And I mean, I don't know if that's his point. I think they're all equally important to us. He picks up on this notion of Sabbath as a form of wellness. And then he lists on page 66, there's about 3 or 4 or 5 different Bible verses that talk about Sabbath. And you may have known about them on page 65 and 66. The first one, of course, is observe the Sabbath day, keep it holy as the Lord your God commanded you. I'm reading on page 65 here. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male or female slave, your ox or your donkey or any of your livestock, the resident aliens in your town, so that your male and female slave may rest as well as you. Remember that you were born a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God has brought you out with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. That is I think we know that, right? I mean, that's one of the easiest commandments to break, at least in our culture. And then, from Exodus 23, for 6 years you shall sow your land and gather its yield. But the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, so that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave the wild animals may eat. You shall do the same with your vineyard and with your olive orchard. And then from Deuteronomy 15, every 7th year you shall grant a remission of debts, and this is the manner of remission. Every creditor shall remit the claim that is held against the neighbor, not exacting it of a neighbor who is a member of the community, because the Lord's remission has been proclaimed. And then in Leviticus, it talks about the Jubilee year. Every 50 years, basically, start over, right? Every 50 years, rest and start over for everything. Like if your debtors, your land, and he picks that up there at the bottom of page 66. He says, the weekly Sabbath, the sabbatical year, the Jubilee year, as described in the Bible passage above, are key to creating a sustainable, healthy community. And in the Judeo-Christian context, they are commanded by God for human community to follow. They provide an overall rhythm for work and rest. Every 7 days, everybody rests, including the animals. Every 7 years, we cancel debt and let the earth rest as well. And the most radical of all is the prescription of the Jubilee year. Every 50 years, not only do we let the earth rest and forgive everybody's debts, we also let people have a home and family to return to. That is, every 50th year, we start over, socially, economically, and ecologically. Wouldn't that be a vision?
Yeah.
I think there are more people on the planet when you look at it than there ever has been, right? What is it, 3 billion people, something? Maybe that's,
Whoa.
Is there more than that?
I think it was 6 for a while.
Hey Siri,
I think it's close.
how many people are alive today?
1 second.
It took a while for her.
I'm counting.
7.88 billion people alive today. Can we sustain, that's the question, can we sustain human life with 8 billion people? I'm talking about the planet, right? I mean, agriculture in Iowa, that's the thing I loved about being an agricultural state. I learned so much up there. They are trying to figure that out. How can we get the most efficient, yield per acre, corn? And they don't, by the way, you probably know this because Missouri's an agriculture state, but they don't eat the corn. It goes into you're a farmer, so, very few people grow up eating corn, but those that do, it's the Iowa sweet corn. It's the best corn you'll ever have. Can we sustain 8 billion people, right? I don't know. I don't even think the biblical had a frame of reference, 8 billion people. And the earth means to rest, right? I mean, that's how we, without our planet, we couldn't survive. So it's an interesting thing.
You asked the question, can we?
Yeah.
We're doing it.
Yeah.
Are we not sustaining life?
Mhm.
And there's 8 billion people in it, so we know we can do it.
Mhm.
Some of them are living in poverty.
We have a lot of.
That has been since before Christ. People were living in poverty. We're doing it.
Yeah.
And there's always gonna be poverty.
Yeah.
There's always gonna be poverty. No matter how many people are on the earth, there will be poverty. Some self-sustained,
Yeah.
some not self-sustained.
But we're also getting rid of a lot of the farmlands. People, they're building more and more and diminishing a lot of the farmlands.
But when you travel, there seems to be miles and miles of plain in the United States. Miles, just forever. I mean, we concentrate in the urban areas, suburb, but beyond that, it's just lots of land.
Mhm.
Now, I guess we're feeding a good portion of the people in the world.
Mhm.
I guess we find ways to do it. But they seem, you've been to Tanzania, I've been to Kenya, and you just see, they seem to find a way to eat and sustain themselves, and they seem to have their own customs of eating. It's not like we may look at not Somalia, but Ethiopia during the 30s and 40s.
Some of the wellness stuff is, we've had a pandemic and it's still going on in the world. And I think it shows an example of how we do not share well. The vaccines, case in point. I heard a NPR program quite a while ago about the vaccines. A major amount of AstraZeneca vaccines were being made in South Africa, and they did not get to use any. They were all shipped out. And here we are now in the U.S. getting ready to ship some back because we've used them and people are refusing to get them here. So abundance and the distribution of abundance is still a big problem. It's always been here, and it's still a big problem. But even in a pandemic, it kind of shows that we're not willing to share, with others readily.
I think the future for farming is not going to be farmland. I think it's going to be skyscrapers. And it's going to be all indoors, and it's going to be seasonal. So if you want cherries in March, you can get cherries in March. If you want cherries in November, you can get cherries in November. It's all going to be indoors, and it's going to be in these great big buildings. And so the farmland is going to be coming inside, and that's, I think, what's going to sustain the future of the earth.
all those buildings, nobody wants to go back to their office in.
But you're going to have trees inside the buildings, you're going to have fruit trees, you're going to have all of your vegetables and fruits, and everything is going to, I believe, in the future, is all going to be inside.
Where are you gonna get the energy to do that?
Yeah,
They'll figure it out.
seems like the sun is so important in growing
Yeah.
everything. and how-
Yeah.
They'll figure it out. It'll happen. It has to if we want to sustain the earth.
To Mark's point, at the bottom of page 66, he picks up on kind of what you were talking about, Mark. God knows that in every human community, no matter how egalitarian its beginnings might be, the circulation of financial and other resources and power and social relationships will eventually become uneven. Some will suffer, others will continue to prosper. The institution of the Sabbath, the sabbatical year, and the Jubilee are God's way of ensuring that economic, financial, and ecological resources will recover their healthy circulation. Just as the circulatory system of a human body, and there's where I mentioned that he brought up that was the most important. Just as the circulatory system of the human body brings nutrition and energy to every part of the body, God longs for human community to have a healthy circulation of resources, reaching not just the powerful and the rich of our society, but everyone. And he goes on to furthermore, kind of brings about Jesus, from Luke 4, where Jesus begins his public ministry in the temple, unrolls the scroll of the prophet Isaiah, and he says this: the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery to the sight of blind, and let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. So he's kind of talking, Jesus is kind of talking back, referring to that, sabbatical thing. So with that in mind, how do you all take a Sabbath? What does Sabbath look like for you? Do you have a kind of a spiritual practice of taking a Sabbath?
It has dramatically changed since I'm no longer working full-time. And I started to change it at the end of my career because I realized I wasn't taking a Sabbath. When you're working full-time and you have commitments with your family, it's very hard to take a Sabbath. And even in the reading, wives are not mentioned. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
Daughters and sons, slaves, male and female, wives are not mentioned.
Do you
And
think
so
that was an
I-
oversight or?
Or is it telling you something?
Yeah,
So I think
dangerous.
it's very hard, I think it's very hard to let that go.
It's better
Yeah.
nobody sitting next to
Anyhow,
you. She gave me permission today.
Getting back to the point, of taking a Sabbath, I realized that when I was working full-time, I would always at least throw in laundry or do something like that Sunday night and set up everything for my week. Go ahead and organize everything I had to finish, any lesson plans I had to finish, anything like that, I would be doing Sunday night. That's still the Sabbath. And we had been to church. I typically fixed lunch. I typically fixed dinner. Mary always, does a lot of helping with cooking too. But really, realistically, I didn't change that until after I went to Israel and we met some Jewish families and they keep a Sabbath. Their Shabbat, Friday night, and then part of Sabbath. And I realized this was something that I needed to start to do, but I think it's very, very hard if you are working full-time, if you have two adults working full-time with children, and you're trying to, keep your budget, you're trying to be involved with your church, you're trying to be involved with your children's activities, and then spending time as a couple. I think it's very, very difficult. So I think if you do go ahead and try to start taking a Sabbath as a family, do a family outing after church, do something special, try to get the kids' homework done on, Friday or Saturday sometimes, so they have a break from things. And they have activities on Saturday, and they have ball game Friday night, and things like that. So I think it is really hard to do that, but I think it's very essential. And I think once you start to do that, you feel better, you feel more connected to God, you feel more connected to your family because you've all gotten a rest. And that's very difficult to do with an active family.
What is the definition of the Sabbath? What do you mean by, keeping the Sabbath? Don't we have different definitions of what it
Yeah.
is?
Yeah, I think he brings that up too in the thing. I mean, it depends on, if you take it literally, every seventh day, like the faithful Jew would take the Shabbat. So literally, if you go to Israel, they put signs and, they turn on their stove, whatever, so they don't have to do any work, So they take that literally. So every seventh day rest, right? Not do anything. But that's what I'm kind of asking and getting at. Look, what does Sabbath look like for you? Me, I work on the seventh day. And so I don't take my rest, on that. I try to take my rest on Fridays the best I can. So that's kind of my Sabbath day. And I try not to do anything, but like Cindy's saying, with small kids, you can't help but, so yeah, that's a good point, but a Sabbath is basically rest, or refraining from doing work. And you don't have to be employed to work, right? You guys know that, so. So how do you rest, step away from the daily grind, and refresh your soul?
Can we talk about it just in what we've practiced in our congregational life?
Sure. Yeah.
My experience has been that we've given pastors in the past sabbatical. But as it spells out further in this chapter, we've obviously neglected volunteers. I mean, so now I jump right past staff completely too, but do we recognize what we should be doing as far as staff in our congregation? Do we recognize that ministry leaders and those active in the ministry should have a form of Sabbath? What I'm driving at is that not only has our culture lost it, our culture has made us kind of oblivious to Sabbath, that many of us ask the question that Dennis does of, okay, so what are we going to call a Sabbath now? And please understand that's coming from somebody that has a Sabbath every day. But I think it's important for us to recognize that, and if we have an expectation of practicing a Sabbath, shouldn't we start it here and have the discipline to work in that direction, and then help, Cindy, as she said, she's now in a different place than she was, but still, it is, you have to be conscious of what you're doing to have or maintain the discipline. I personally think we've lost it completely.
And it's a notion of rest.
Yeah.
I just think it's important for our personal and our physical and mental health. I mean, it's like, I don't sleep well at night. And so on a night that I get a good night's sleep, I can't believe how much different I feel that next day. So that tells me the importance of rest. It says we don't do it. I mean, going back to the farmer's fields and stuff, let it rest. I mean, not only do they let it rest, but they rotate their crops just to introduce different nutrients and stuff in it. And so, I mean, I personally know what the value of rest is, because I really don't get it all that often. So it's just.
I grew up on an Iowa farm, and we were Roman Catholics at that point. We didn't do anything on Sunday that we didn't have, other stuff we had to do. And the only time that there's an exception, if there's a drought or something, or there's a real crisis, they go to the Catholic priest and decide whether we were going to do other things other than what we normally do on Sunday.
Yeah.
So they took it quite seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's a commandment, right? It's not optional. You gotta rest, take the rest. Even God rested the seventh day, like he created humans, and then what do you gotta do next? You took a nap, right?
Yeah, but for a woman, chores are so different now. Like, I remember when I was little, washing was like a 2-day thing. Cleaning house was like a big deal. And so now, you throw a load in the wash machine, it's done, all you have to do is take it from the washer to the dryer, like, that's not really work. Put the dishes in the dishwasher, you have to unload them, sure, but it's not like you're standing at the sink and washing all these dishes. I just got a Roomba thing, and it's like vacuum.
Turn them loose.
So the chores that I do are not like, where I'm not exhausted, I'm not like, I don't feel like it's work. Like working outside is like planting flowers and stuff, I don't feel like that's work, like you shouldn't do that on a Sunday, because that's work. And it's just, the culture is so different. Now, if you live on a farm, that's different, because you still have to feed the animals and all that, but kind of looking around the table, I think you're all kind of in the same situation. Housework really isn't work anymore. Or you guys clean after the
That is, you know, it takes your time. You know, even though it's more convenient, we have much more modern conveniences and we're much better off than other people of other generations where it was much more labor intensive. But what I'm saying, it still takes time. And if it's like gardening, if you're planting in your yard, but that's in other words, if you were working on the farm, that would be farm work and that's very hard labor. But if you're setting out flowers and something and you're a hobby gardener, then that is your recreation. Washing clothes, doing dishes, cleaning the house, scrubbing the floors, all of that stuff. I don't think that's recreation of any sort. And so I would not consider that a Sabbath activity. Yes, it's much easier. And yes, it's something we just do because we're used to doing it. But it's not a leisure activity. In other words, it's not sitting and reading a book. It's not maybe doing something fun that you really wanted to do around your house or whatever. It's a different activity. It's a necessary activity. And if you don't do it, there are consequences if you don't do it. A leisure activity, if you don't do it, you just don't get your rest or rejuvenation. But a task, a chore, an activity, it's not as labor intensive, but it still consumes your time. Yeah.
So these are all good, and just to get back to Dennis and jumping off what you guys, Skip and the others have said, is like, with all, because the biblical imagination had no clue about washing machines and Roombas, right? Completely not in their culture at all. So what does Sabbath look like for us? You know, like that's the question I think with, because for them, they spend their day, you know, like talking about what, I mean, you know what, you know, cleaning, you know, everything like that, cooking, it was all work all the time. And so you had to take a rest. Where we have these modern day conveniences like a Roomba, which I love. It's so fun to watch. I find myself like watching it. It's mesmerizing in it just to watch the thing, like go back. And the dog hates it. They're fun. But it's fun to watch it work while you sit back and
There's your rest.
yeah, there she rests, right. So yeah, what does Sabbath, or do we need a Sabbath, right? The Bible says we should take it. So what does that look like? You know, that's gonna look different for everybody here. I mean, Dennis, your work may be your Sabbath type thing. Your aviation.
That's what I was gonna bring up.
Yeah, that might be Sabbath for
If
you.
you like to go to work, that can be utilized as your Sabbath.
Right.
I can't stand to sit, you say,
Yeah.
pick up a book and sit there and read. I can't do that.
Yeah.
I'm not built that way. That's not relaxing to me. I gotta be doing something,
Yeah.
but it doesn't necessarily have to be work. It just has to be something that I enjoy. And that's
Yeah,
the key.
that's-
If you're doing something that you enjoy on the Sabbath, whether it's working at church or working at home, it's part of your Sabbath. And that's how I look at Sundays. Sundays is kind of,
Your Sabbath.
yeah, it's my Sabbath. I'm off, so I can do whatever I want to do, but I gotta enjoy it.
Yeah.
So
So part of it, I think the word's been thrown out here a couple times, recreation, recreation.
Recreation.
It's about being recreated for another week, you know, and taking that break from whatever you're doing. Writing a 99-page proposal on Sunday night is not fun. I've done it too many times. And that's not,
It's not much fun either.
exactly. So, you know, that process, but, so, you know, something that gets you away from what you're normally doing every day, that helps give you that break to recreate.
Yeah.
And it may look like work to others.
Well, that's why God made us all different,
Right.
you know, because you don't have to do the same thing I'm doing to be enjoyed.
Yeah.
Yes.
I could not do quilting.
Oh, come on.
I think I got invited last week to do it.
Yes.
Kind of like Mark, I got fingers that just don't move that well, so.
I noticed you left after
You
everybody.
did.
How to clear a room.
You know, we talk about, we're able to do these things because we're financially comfortable to do these things. But because we've reached these hierarchy of needs that have all been met. And now we can think about sitting around on a Sunday, or what we do on a Sunday. But many people in our society haven't reached those. They're still working on their security, they're working on their survival, they're working on this, that, and the other thing. So you can't really, that doesn't fit everybody, and that goes along with what you just said. Once you meet those needs, you can go on to imagine what you should do in these other areas. But, you know, like you say, everything is different, defined, and how we come to that conclusion. But the rest of our society isn't able to, they've got to work.
Right.
And if you don't work, you don't eat.
Right.
And you don't have other things. You've got to meet all those needs, and then we can sit here and self-actualize, and we get to dream of a better life on Sunday. But how do you teach that to somebody who has to go to work?
Well, does anybody remember Getty's? This guy would get on TV and tell everybody, we are not open on Sunday. Big furniture stuff.
Okay.
And he obviously paid his people well enough for 6 days a week that they all took off on Sunday. Now they've been bought by a big corporation and it's moving that line, but, you know, he was one that proclaimed taking off on Sunday, you know, on TV every week.
So remember we had blue lights too. We're
I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, why
Yeah.
they don't work on Sundays.
Yeah.
Chick-fil-A.
So they take that literally, right? We're gonna get to Dennis's point, where they are literally saying, we're not making our people work on Sundays.
But we can name those couple because there are
So
only a couple.
Well, yeah,
Is my point. I mean, we're much more in a culture, you know, I worked at Bass Pro Shops for 18 years after retirement. And for the 18 years, I always enjoyed listening to the overhead PA system tell the customers that were in the store at the time that on Christmas Day, we allow our associates to be off for them to be with their family. That was it. 364 days, stores open, one day.
They were only closed 3 days.
But that's my point, is that in that culture, now, if you want to work, and back to Jay's point, you know, there's folks that either need it and are because of the way they're driven. If you look at how Dennis said, okay, they want to be active. I don't know what drove me. I knew about a Sabbath, but I worked Sundays as far as Bass Pro Shops was concerned, and all the way back through my working career, I worked Sundays if it was necessary, if it was scheduled or required. My point earlier, and still, is that isn't this where we can keep people in touch with the discipline? We obviously have moved far away from what Scripture tells us. I don't know about any of you, but I've never heard trumpet. Okay, so that, you know, I mean, that's just one example right there. As far as the 50-year mark or whatever, I never heard it declared. I heard of it because read scripture, but I personally have never heard it. And looking at many of the other things, not only are they not happening anymore, I don't think I can have an expectation that they will happen anymore. So that's why I thought it's like here, and a discipline that could be taught or communicated and were educated, so that all of the working class, all of the different generations, which as everybody said, people are different, are able to practice it in some fashion and to some degree.
So, as one of the very few people who's probably still working full-time and has kids in this group, I think there are only 3 of us, kids at home.
I still work.
I meant kids at home and that activity stuff. So Sabbath doesn't always have to be on a Sunday. Even though it says 7 days, like you said, you take Friday off. In our family, because Chad works, I mean, every Sunday youth group happens, except for I think he doesn't have it 3 times a year. So even if I want to say today is the family Sabbath, there's no way that we would be able to do a family activity on Sunday. So you also have to think outside the box and not just think about Sunday. So think about how you can, in your, as you're going through the week and everything, figure out a time, even if it's not a full day, like it says, get out of that routine and do something different. And so that's kind of how we do it. We don't always do it as a family activity because too many other things are going on and we only have one. So those families with 4 kids, that's even harder because if they're, if they're in sports and stuff like that, this past year, as much as we all hate what COVID did on the global scale, it really allowed us to take a step back. Caitlin had a lot of medical issues, but that also then, all the activities stopped and it allowed us to kind of relook at what we wanted to do and what was good for our time. So, it's not been a fun year for anybody. It's been kind of nice for me because I've worked from home since last March, and we're not going back till August to talk about those office buildings. We own ours, but you just kind of have to look at it and figure out what is that change in your routine. Yesterday I ran errands with my mom, and while that's not the most fun thing to do on the weekend, it was fun to have time with my mom. Whereas during the week, even working at home, I'm still working 10-hour days, just 15 seconds. So it's just looking at that change in routine. But as far as talking about the staff, I mean there are weeks Chad works 7 days because something's going on up here, that he needs to be up, especially right now as we're down, a staff member. You just kind of have to take those bits and pieces sometimes.
Well, and when I commented earlier about what we're doing in our own congregation, when I said that the pastor, we practice having a sabbatical for the pastor, if we look back at our history, the best I know of our history, I've not been here nearly as long as most of you, but as I look back, the only thing that I saw that was a sabbatical was continuing education. Okay, that's not rest. I mean, again, and another thing that we've gotten callous to is that if we do send the pastor to continuing education, is there anybody that ever checks with the pastor as to what they just experienced? Is there any expectation on our part after the pastor has done that or experienced that? My point is I think that there's a certain numbness that we've gotten to with because of what we're surrounded with in our culture, that things are just kind of on automatic pilot. That it's fun to watch, just like the Roomba. But it's not really, I think, necessarily serving the purpose. And so, just as we sit here, I think in terms of many of the men here that have been in the retreat in the past, and I know many of the women also who have been in the women's retreat, and we see what good occurs, we experience what good occurs just in those events, to the point that we long for them again. We look, and with the pandemic, that's an interruption, another interruption that we have. It's an important thing for us to look at what are those disciplines and work back intentionally on those things. And as I say, as far as the sabbatical is concerned, I think we have to evaluate what part of it would be good, continue education, what part of it would be good, rest. And recognizing, for instance, the Chad, the staff, and the others on the staff as well. I mean, that, hey, there's something that we need to be intentional about. Because he's not gonna take off on his own. He's not gonna do that discipline personally because he sees the need that he's filling. In here, it talks about you get to a point where you take a sabbatical, and part of the message there is that you recognize and others recognize that you're replaceable. You're not irreplaceable. There's an importance to that.
So getting back to Skip, let's bring this back. Why is this a currency in this cycle of blessing? How does this piece fit in? Remember, we're talking about the cycle of blessing for congregation. So how is that currency feeding into that cycle of blessing? Does that make sense? How is this fitting into the larger picture? For sustainable missional ministry, right? Sustainable is the key question.
It may be the most important blessing because we recognize the importance of wellness. If we just start with physical wellness, we know.
And you need to have rest to have physical wellness.
Exactly. Well, it's been said. Hey, I have a decent night's sleep and I recognize, I have some time off that I consider recreation that might not even be recreation, and I already feel benefits from it. The point being there is that it's important for us to be able to grab onto those things, but you have to know what they are and you have to have some guidance and direction from someplace in order to get there.
If you don't get rest or do something, you get burnout. And then you quit doing everything because you just overloaded yourself.
And that's just the physical wellness. We know we've got all those other things, the mental and the emotional and the spiritual. You could have people that make a case on either side of how spiritually well are we after what we've been through in the past year. Because a lot of the things that fed us got interrupted. Fellowship is a good example, Christian fellowship. We now appreciate being able to look at each other and see a full face. We certainly not.
Maybe not.
Again, it's different for each.
I like Mark's word, the
Recreation.
recreation.
As I read through this book, I think it's a reflection of the fact that when I grew up, churches were a vital part of the community, and nothing really happened in the community that the church wasn't involved in. As I've gotten older, the church gets pushed aside for various reasons, government things that are usually part of the church. I think to the extent that we develop this currency in this church or any church, it's going to determine how effective we really are going to be. If we want to have a significant impact on this community, we have to develop these currencies. Otherwise, we won't have much of an impact.
Yeah, and that's the premise, yeah.
And part of the question there is with communities, when do you really push back and stay planted? And when do you compromise and start to be able to build the relationships to not fit in, but become a part of, so that your voice can be heard? I remember our church up in Illinois, all of a sudden the park district was having soccer start at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. We were a very large congregation, so we pushed back on the park district, and they ended up starting at noon. I'm sure that's long gone. I mean, so where do we look for opportunities to fit into that model of society, but yet have our voice and our actions known? I think that, not to compromise and throw our values away, to be able to come in the door, okay? That's a tough one.
I mean, practically speaking, too, at the end of the chapter, he picks up on some of these, like a health fair, things that congregations can do. Because we've talked really about Sabbath, and that's how we approach this, but there's other things too, like besides Sabbath, to keep our bodies healthy. I mean, you all know if your body's not healthy, we can't, it impacts the rest of your life. But this culture of wellness, or currency wellness can feed into the currency relationship. I mean, they're all kind of overlapping. You kind of see that. So I think it's healthy for us too, to like what Jay was saying, because 2/3 of the world is subsistence farmers. I mean, there is no retirement. I mean, what we have doesn't exist in Tanzania, right? I mean, it's unheard of. Like, you have to work to keep living, right? I mean, so just recognizing, the social location of retirement as we know it is a Western concept. I mean, it's not, it's just not something that a lot of people in the world get to enjoy, right? I mean, you've always got to form or be reliant upon. That's why in Africa they have large families, because when I get older, I'm going to have my kids or my grandkids provide for me, because I can't farm anymore. I can't pull rice out. That type of thing. Agricultural family used to be big. I know my grandmother was one of 8 kids. She grew up on a ranch. That's because you needed kids to do the work. There's a lot of animal husbandry and stuff. A lot of work to keep livestock and it's a lot of work keeping one dog going. He's getting older too, so.
Yeah.
I'm crabby. So, all right, anybody else have anything? Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The number 7 comes up numerous times in here.
Yeah.
And it talks about 7 days and relieving debt after 7 days. This is stuff that doesn't happen anymore.
Right.
It's not even applicable to our current culture. I mean, it's just not something. Did they actually do this back in the time of Deuteronomy?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, it's been 7 days since you made this loan, it's been forgiven, or 7 years and it's been forgiven. There gotta be some kind of, what is the emphasis on? What are they trying to say? Because none of this stuff happens anymore.
As I read it, it was based on the currency relationship, because if you read that little bit in there that said within the community, it didn't mean if somebody outside your community owed you, it said,
Right.
somebody who's a member of the community, because larger mission has been proclaimed. So I think that was part of keeping relationships well. Your neighbor owed you money for 7 years, and you knew very well he was never going to be able to pay you. So why keep the burden on his shoulders and, just forgive it?
Just forgive it.
Yeah. And be a neighbor.
You had to be well-to-do to be able to forgive it. Usually when you get repaid on a loan, you need that money yourself. Yeah.
But if you've been without it for 7 years, what's the difference?
I don't know how that really works.
But was this just for the Jewish people, or did everybody back then, that culture, follow this? Since this was part of the commandments that God gave to the children of Israel.
Right.
Was it just for them, or did other
Yeah.
cultures do it?
Yeah, this would have been for the Israelites,
Just for
right?
the Israelites.
And I don't know what other cultures, I mean, it could have been, but yeah, And you're right, that, I mean, this was just for the tribes, right? The 12 tribes of Israel, you know, would follow this, so.
But if you sold your property to somebody else, after that, I think it was a 50-year one, you got your property back.
Mhm.
That just seems.
The way to redistribute. Well, these are interesting things, I mean, just how far away our culture's gotten, right?
You have to remember, everybody was essentially one large family, extended family.
Yeah.
How would our families be better if we didn't hold on to grudges of you owe me this and I owe you that, and yeah.
It'd be okay if you aren't the receiving end. I want to sign up for being the receiver.
All right, well, thanks, folks. We'll pick up with the leadership piece next. Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe I'm the only one that doesn't know this, but what is the word egalitarian or egalitarian?
Equal. So, yeah, you are treated equal in a relationship.
So was it type of socialism?
Well, it could be, you know, like, I think about roles in a marriage, you know, like some couples have a very defined role, like a patriarchal role or a matriarchal role. One in an egalitarian relationship, they're both equal. So the decision-making, I think, is between somebody one person doesn't just have the power, it's shared with that.
What I found interesting, and you always pick something up on page 69 where it talks about the covenant with God and the 10 Commandments. The background there, I didn't get that before. But, you know, we're not slaves anymore. Now we're a huge tribe wandering around in the wilderness. Now what do we do? How do we relate to each other? You know? Somebody gonna steal my stuff, it says? Somebody gonna murder somebody? What do we do? So all of a sudden you have a covenant with God about things that you should and shouldn't do.
And that's all about Christianity, though. That's what we're here for in the church. It's about being together, being there to help other people as Christians. And we all want to do that. But we're supposed to do it with everyone. But the truth of the matter is, we're more, if you're a good Lutheran, you're in. If you're not a Lutheran, you're not quite. You know, it's kind of like, we kind of lean towards our own. And that's the way it is. And it's important, if we're all Christians, that's what we have to do, is relate that way.
Yes, you have to realize, this is what we teach in the confirmation class, you have to realize for hundreds of years, the Israelites were told every aspect of their life, like when you get up, when you work, when you die. And so God's like, okay, I have to give these people some restrictions, otherwise they're just going to wander aimlessly they did wander aimlessly for 40 years. But so yeah.
Well, that come across the Fiddler on the Roof. He's talking about our traditions. This.
Yep.
Yeah, but I hate to say it, but open it up the backwards maybe, but to put that in perspective, the same thing happened after the Civil War, when we freed our slaves. They weren't given a handbook on what do we do that we're free? I mean, they were just turned loose and nobody knew what they were supposed to do. So that created a whole part of history that never gets talked about. Yeah, so they were free too, so.
All right.
I think we were excused. I don't know.
His book's still here, yes.